Hi. Yeehaw. This is the Weird Christian, and today I was just going to talk about how our understanding of God makes a difference in how we relate to one another in our law and authority, and even to relate to one another. And I think it's really important to understand that there is a huge connection with this. And here I'm going to be showing the kind of connection. I'm going to take it from a Christian perspective, but it's not usually the normal Christian perspective because most people don't see what I'm going to present to you in the Bible. Though it's there, they just don't. It's where you have your mind set. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it, right? That's usually how it goes. So if you're looking for something, but if you're not looking for something, you can have lots of interesting stuff around, but you won't see it because you're not really looking for it. So here I'm going to be talking about how Jesus' life shows where it has a very much of an analogy or a comparison to the nation of Israel. I'm just going to take a small section of Jesus' life. I'm not going to take the whole history of Israel, but just a small section, and compare it to a certain area of Israel. Basically, I'm going to compare it to Israel being in the world, and then going through the Red Sea, and then going towards to the Promised Land, and then you get to the Promised Land. This is what the area in my life I'm going to be talking about, and it's just in Jesus' life. It has a similar flow of it chronologically. So, okay, so we all know that I'm pretty sure that Israel was in Egypt and they were under slavery. Well, first they weren't slaves, but they were slaves after a bit. And then Moses led them out, and they went through the Red Sea, and then they went through the desert, and there in the desert they received the law, and they had to deal with law. There was a lot of temptations going on, and a lot of rebellion going on in the wilderness. And then after that, then they went into the Promised Land. So this little part is, I'm just going to be talking about how Jesus was with his Father. Here's John the Baptist preparing the way, but before this time, Jesus was living with his family in Nazareth and living with his father. Maybe his father died. Nobody doesn't really say. But anyway, he left his family and he went to John the Baptist. So here it is, Jesus, the baptism of Jesus. Then Jesus, this is in chapter 3 of Matthew. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. So at Jesus' baptism, you have Jesus, who is God. You have the Spirit of God, who is God. And you have the Father saying, this is my Son, who I love, and with him I am well pleased. So you have all three basically saying, listen, this guy, this is God, and he's going to start his mission. But basically, Jesus at this point is coming out of his father's house, Joseph, and taking on the mission of going into his other father's house, his heavenly Father. And he's going through the baptism, which is comparable to, in a sense, a Red Sea experience where you die and you live to God. So this is what's going on here. So he's gone through a Red Sea experience, and now coming out of the world of his earthly father and going to the Red Sea, and then he comes in to the wilderness. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Now, why was it 40 days and 40 nights? Well, Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years. So there's a parallel there, a day being a year. Sometimes that's used in Bible analogies of different things, the pattern. So Satan came, and the tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Now there's a lot of things going on here. First he's saying, he's trying to create doubt, I guess, but he's also declaring that, hey, you're the Son of God. So if you're the Son of God, now in the wilderness, Moses gave the law on stone, and Jesus is the bread of life. So you have some interesting things going on here. Them being, using the law to feed yourself or for your own convenience. And Jesus answered, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So basically it's not to use the law for your own convenience. You live the law, and it may be hard, but you live it anyway, but not for your own convenience. So now this is a different way of understanding it than, let's say, in this Christianity.com. They have the wilderness temptation, and it comes across much different in their understanding. It's just Jesus tempting him, and then Satan tempting Jesus, and then Jesus saying, well, overcoming temptation. But I see it in a different way. I see it actually Satan presenting his law, the way he sees things should be done, and then Jesus saying, no, this is what law and authority is about. So it's the presenting of the law is what's going on in the wilderness. And that's the way I see it, which is you're not going to find that in here. You're not going to find that Jesus is presenting the law and Satan's presenting his understanding of governance. You won't find that anywhere here. And it's not, if you do a Google search, I'm sure they won't talk about the Jesus presenting the law, having discussion about law and authority in the wilderness. But if you really look at it, that is what's going on. It's the presenting of two different ideas of law and authority in the Bible. Because Satan is saying, you should use the law for your own convenience. That's how he does his government. And Jesus says, no, you don't use the law for your own convenience. And then the devil took him to a holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up on their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against stone. And Jesus answered him, it is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. So here, the next thing that Satan says, this is how you run your government, is you use your authority to basically abuse those under you, because they'll balance the budget, so that you won't have your foot strike against the stone. So basically you're using your minions to do whatever you want for your own ego and that's how you should run your government. And Jesus says, no, that's not what you should do. You shouldn't test God or your servants to show that you are greater than them, and they have to just do everything to make it so that you don't get hurt, even though you may do stupid things like jump off from, use the highest point of the temple. So using religious high point or religious law, the highest point of authority, and just jump off. That's how you can claim that you have God's authority behind you when you're doing this. That's how you're supposed to run your government. You're supposed to say, I have God's authority behind what I'm doing here, so let's just jump off the cliff together. Or I'm going to jump off, you protect me, you balance the budget, or I'm going to make all these regulations, or build a pyramid, or whatever, that you guys are going to make it happen, and then maybe some people will die, and maybe they'll be starving, or whatever, but that's not my problem as an authority. So that's basically how he's presenting, the devil is presenting authority. And Jesus says, no, you don't do that. Do not test the Lord your God. Do not put your God to the test, and don't abuse your, don't use his name to an authority, on the temple for your crazy ideas and to make yourself, to show how great you are. Basically using God's name in vain. Basically, that's what this is saying. Use God's name in vain. And Jesus says, no, you don't do that. Okay, and then the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. And Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And the devil left him, and the angels came and attended to him. So what's going on here is Satan is saying, if you just follow me, it'll all be easy. You don't have to worry about all going to the cross or healing people or anything like that. I'll make it so that I'll give you the easy street, and I'll give you all this authority, give you the easy way, and just worship me and you can have it all. And Jesus says, no. I will worship my God and I will serve him only. I won't just do for my own the easy street. I'm not going to do the easy street. And so I'm going to serve my God, not serving you. So that's the point I wanted to get across here. So this is an idea. There's a lot of discussion of law and authority. And I just wanted to point this out in the Bible. There's this one spot where it talks a lot about law and authority and how you're supposed to actually relate to it. Now, you can read Christianity.com and they won't talk about that. They say it's a temptation and Jesus overcame a temptation. And that's as far as they go. That's the deepest they go, I think. Okay, but I want to get into law and authority. And basically, in the ways of this world, they use God's, like going up on the mountain, the highest part of the temple, and they say, I've got my authority from going up, from being at the highest part of the temple. And that's how they make their laws and so forth. And this is something which is done like with the laws of the systems of this world, like the Corpus Juris Civilis. That's a man who was named Justinian the Great back in 529, 534, and he's a Byzantine emperor. He made this code, and it's basically that idea of I've been given authority, now I'm going to make law and tell people how to live. And this is how we do it. Now, it's the basic goal of it was to simplify laws because there are so many laws. But the basic idea of it is that the king has laws and everybody has to follow those laws. Now, whether the laws are good or bad, that doesn't really matter. and you make laws, start making laws to handle everything. Now, this is the thing, even with this law here. Um, so we have a law system here. And the point about this law system I want to give about it is the way they establish it is they have sections on okay, here we go. The Codex. Let's see. Okay, they have legislation about religion in the law system. And so basically, it secured the status of Christianity as the state religion. And just as before, where they had the state religion as Roman gods, if you didn't worship the Roman gods, then you were, persecuted. A lot of Christians were called atheists because they didn't worship all these gods. They only worshiped one God. So they considered them atheists because of that. And so they had their state religion. And if you weren't part of the religion of the state, you were considered a non-citizen. So you didn't have rights. Okay? So that's kind of and they had laws about heresies. The first law in the Codex requires all persons under the jurisdiction of the emperor to hold Christian faith. This was primarily aimed at heresies such as, well, I don't know this heresy, but anyway, the next became a springboard for discussions of international law. So the biggest thing is they said this is what Christianity was. Now, there was a lot of different people, there were heresies, so forth. And because they were considered heresies, they didn't really get any, they just got charged, whether, as criminal offenses, rather than going after criminal offenses. If you didn't agree with what the Roman authorities said were Christian religion, or like say you could say you're a Christian, but if you didn't agree with their Christian religion, then you were not given a citizenship, and you were also considered a heresy, and you might, be imprisoned or excommunicated or moved out or not have any rights under the law. So it caused a lot of things like that, rather than going after, let's say if you were doing fraud or embezzlement or criminal activity. It was more of it set up a thing about thought police, basically, which can get pretty nasty at times. And this is the Justinian law system. You set up a thought police, and so you'd have not aimed at pagan beliefs as such. It forbade particular pagan practices. For example, if a person presented at the pagan sacrifice may be indicated as if for murder, which, yeah, okay, that's fine. I think that's good. People sacrificing other people at a sacrifice. That I agree with that. These are the kind of laws that are good, and that's good. I mean, they had some good things. A lot of pagan practices were pretty awful. We don't really think they were, but excuse me, they were awful. So you have to be aware of that. So, but there's other laws. There's this one here. This one is another one of those, the Westminster Confession of Faith. Now, I read that, and it was just basically the same idea, where you say that if you don't believe in this idea of faith, then, which is a Reformed Confession of Faith, then you were not considered a citizen. And this was voted on at Westminster by the authorities in England at the time. I think it was in 1647. Here it says drawn up in 1646. There was a war going on, a civil war, and so they wanted to draw up something to try to unite the people and also decide whether people were Christians or not. So you had a lot of conflict going on, and people saying, well, you're not Christian, so you don't have any rights. But they would say they're Christians, and they were more Christian than these guys. If you actually read the Westminster Confession, which I have, and I've kind of written a pre-book on it, and I found it to be had a lot of conflicting and insane statements in it, and didn't have really a lot about forgiveness, or what's that got to do with the cross. Had nothing to do with that, and it also presented God as being good and evil and everything. It's to me, it's a mess, but it's actual Reformed theology, and there's several groups that follow it. There's the Presbyterians, and there's Baptists that follow it, different groups. The Puritans did that, and I found that they were kind of confused. And you can see that even in the life of Cromwell, who was living at that time during the Civil War in England, and though he killed the King Charles, he said he didn't want to be a king, but he basically shut down Parliament and ran around with his army, beating up on everybody, and acting like a king. So there's kind of a disconnect about what you're doing and who you are, and that's because even in the document Westminster Confession, there's a kind of a schism, a schizophrenic kind of idea of law and authority, and this was very much what was going on. And King Charles he called him the first, but he was King Charles at that time, and he was beheaded after they had a war with him, and he got caught, and then they had a bishop war because there's guys that didn't agree with that, so they kicked out the bishops that were already there, and it was really ugly, actually. So, but I'm just saying that this is the law system that is actually used, or the idea, the principles of law that is used to make the laws in the Westminster Parliament and court system. So that's the point I want to make. Now, during the history, there's quite a few ideas about what Atonement was about, and we'll probably get onto that later on in my next one. I'm going to shut down here, but just testing it out, see how things are going. But I'll be talking about different theories of atonement. This fellow, Stephen D. Morse, he presents some, not all of them, and I'll be going into other ones. We sometimes think there's only one way that people think about it. Stephen, he goes to moral influence and the ransom theory and the Christus Victor. Some of them have several of them at the same time to use, some groups. The satisfaction theory and the penal substitution theory and the governmental theory and the scapegoat theory. And there's other theories too that, so anyway, I'm going to go on that the next time I talk about this. So may God bless you, and may He give you peace. And stop.